Welcome to Pistons Talk Podcast. Hope you guys are having a great Saturday night. In today's episode, what will we be discussing? Ausar to take a leap was listening to a Yahoo Sports podcast earlier today, and they were talking about Ausar. So we'll be reading a quote and giving our overall just opinions and reactions on the quote from Yahoo. Chris Brousard from First Things First was also talking about the Detroit Pistons, and he had them as one of the teams in the East not to sleep on. We kind of reading another quote from him and giving our opinions on the matter. Malik Beasley, first time we've actually heard him open up since the gambling allegations have happened. And then we'll end the podcast with the update on Cam Thomas. Jake Fisher had reported some things on Cam Thomas and also kind of touched on the Detroit Pistons element in this as of late. As you guys know, there was a lot of gambling sports books that had the Pistons linked to be the odds-on favorite to go get him. So Jake kind of gave his reporting and what he's hearing on Cam Thomas's latest RFA situation. But let's get into today's episode. Let's start with the Ausar to take a leap. Now, this is a quote from Dan Titus. This is from Vinny Goodwill's podcast, Good Word with Goodwill. If you guys want to go check it out, they talked about the Pistons and a couple other teams in the Eastern Conference. So Dan Titus on which NBA players that could take a leap next season. And this is what Dan said, quote, I think Ausar leap is what's really going to propel the Detroit Pistons. Thing about Ausar, I think he's been kind of overlooked because he dealt with the blood clots and he kind of came on mid-season. Now, I do agree there with Dan, the first quote in this video. Ausar had to deal with the blood clot situation, and we didn't really get to see him, I think, until like maybe second or third week in November. And then he was on a minute restriction because he didn't have a training camp. So he had to condition himself game in and game out. And I thought Ausar did a pretty good job. And I do agree with him. I do think a lot of people kind of overlooked Ausar because he wasn't playing right away. He didn't have a training camp. And he didn't come on until I don't know, like late November, early December. So that was the first part of the quote. The second part of the quote, he says, if you're looking at a two-way player that can take this next level leap in this year, I think we're going to see Ausar Thompson kind of be more closer to what we saw men last year. I think he could be that X factor for them to go on to that next level if they're going to take it there, end quote. Now, I think a lot of people last year when they were watching the Houston Rockets and seeing like how good Amen Thompson is, just the way he was able to take over games. I think that's what Dan is saying. Like Ausar Thompson, he thinks is going to have a similar season to what Amen had last season with the Houston Rockets. And we saw Ausar develop quite a bit. There was a game against the Knicks. I don't remember which game it was, but he really popped off on my screen. I think it was a really big reason why the Detroit Pistons were able to win one of their playoff games in MSG. But I've always said if that kid gets a jump shot, he's going to be an absolute problem. And I think a lot of us have said the same thing. We all know the defense is borderline elite, if not elite already. It's just the jump shot. Like we know in the dunker spot, yeah, he's money. He's really good at cutting. I think the one thing with him to take a leap, there are two things that came into my mind immediately. It's just the handling of the basketball, getting better, just not turning the ball over as much and getting the ball handling a little bit more tight, get his handles a little bit more tight so he can take on some maybe lead guard reps, some backup point guard reps. Who knows? I kind of like the ball in his hands because he is a pretty good passer, believe it or not. And the second thing is the shooting, like the perimeter shooting in particular. Like if he can become, I'm not saying like he needs to become a 40% three-point shooter this season. It'd be nice if he could, but it's probably not going to happen. If he can just be league average, like get in the 30s, like 30 to 33. I think that's a huge step in development. I did notice last year there were a lot of times where he decided not to shoot the three and just try to dribble into the painted area, or just drive to the basket and go for a layup instead of shooting a shot because he wasn't really confident in it. I think that's something that he's probably going to be, if he's not already, I'm sure he is, working with Fred Vincent. I mean, we saw Ron Holland and how his jump shot looked a lot cleaner. The release looked smoother. I'm sure Ron and Ausar are working with Fred Vincent a lot this summer, redefining their jump shots and getting them a little bit, cleaner in terms of just the release and the footing and everything that, Fred is probably working on with both of them. But I do agree with Dan on this. Like if Ausar does take a leap, I think it makes the Detroit Pistons ceiling, maybe they're a 6 seed, possibly like a 4 seed. Um, if he gets a jump shot, that's just an absolute problem. It'd be like a baby Kawhi Leonard, in my opinion, because there's so many things defensively that he does that I think is like already elite. And it's kind of scary to think about because he's going into his 3rd season, and he's so young. Want to do a transition over to our next segment with Chris Brousard. And he was talking about the Detroit Pistons as well. It was kind of like a tier list, if you will. So he had this tier list of East teams not to sleep on. He had the Atlanta Hawks, the Detroit Pistons, and the Orlando Magic. But this is what he did say about the Detroit Pistons. He said, I think the experience of what they went through with the Knicks is just going to make them that much more competent and better. I like Detroit to be a dangerous team next year. Now, I tend to agree with Chris Brousard on this. Now, I could just make a podcast episode talking about the playoffs against the Knicks and, what we saw out there, the takeaways, and how it will make them better. I think the physicality standpoint will definitely make this team better. I mean, even the Knicks credited the Pistons, getting them mentally prepared to take on the Boston Celtics. And you saw the physicality in the Knicks Celtics second round, and they were the more physical team, and that's why they ended up beating the Celtics in the second round. And they credit the Pistons for that. And so we'll probably see a more physical basketball team going into this upcoming season. I also think this was the first year that Cade Cunningham and all these young guys, you have to experience some winning. You won 44 games last year. You finished as a 6 seed. Kind of just reflecting on last year, like they could have easily won 50 games last year. There's just a couple that just didn't bounce their way. And I think, getting another year under JB Bickerstaff, getting more familiar with him and all the coaches, having an off season to work on your craft. All these guys are going to get better, and they're still incredibly young. You added some vets, some brand new vets in Duncan Robinson and Karis LeVert. I think that New York Knicks series is really going to kind of put a chip on the shoulder. Ausar Thompson in particular, especially when Jalen Brunson hit that game-winning shot to send the Pistons home. I'm sure that's just like living in his head rent-free, and I'm sure he's working in the gym each and every day. But I do agree with Chris here. Like playing the Knicks in the first round definitely, I think, is going to be motivating the Detroit Pistons this year. And I'm sure anytime the Pistons play the Knicks, it's probably going to be a nationally televised game because anytime those two teams play, it's absolute cinema. And Isaiah Stewart obviously didn't get to play in the playoffs against the Knicks. He played in game 1, but you could tell he wasn't right. Jaden Ivey didn't get to play in those playoff games. I'm sure he wants to show what he's all about against the Knicks. But this upcoming season, them to be a dangerous team, 100% agree with Chris Brousard there. I know I'm probably a little bit more positive than most Pistons fans out there, but I honestly think this could be a top 4 team in the East. I really do. Because I expect all these young guys to take another leap. I expect them to just get better this offseason. But hey, man, maybe it's me being a little bit optimistic. I did want to transition into the Malik Beasley stuff. Now, before I put the Instagram screenshots on the screen, I just want to say I'm not going to really going too deep into the gambling allegations because here's the thing, guys. I don't know anything. I don't think anyone really knows anything except the lawyers, like in these cases. And I think it would be irresponsible for me to try to speak on something I know nothing about. But Malik Beasley took to his Instagram this morning and he posted a couple of pictures. And one of the pictures has him in a Detroit Pistons uniform. It says, "Best believe I'm coming back even better." And then the picture to the right says, "Never needed your opinion." So this is the first time we've seen Malik Beasley, talk or, post a story with an actual caption on it, probably since May. He's been not posting, and obviously there's a reason for that, with the allegations going on right now. I think everything is just kind of a wait and see approach. I don't really know if he'll, be playing in the NBA this season. Who knows? Gonna have to wait and see how these court hearings go and these court cases go, because there's the allegations and then there's the lawsuits with the dentist and the barber shop and everything like that, right? But I hope he does play in the NBA this season. He's a fun basketball player to watch. I just don't think it's going to be in the Detroit Pistons uniform. I think Trajan made it really clear that they were really disappointed that this happened, because they were fully prepared to give him a mid-level for 3 years and have him come back. But they had to pivot. They had to pivot to Karis LeVert. They had to pivot to Duncan Robinson. And I think the Pistons have kind of moved on. But wish him Malik well. He might sign a veterans minimum with probably a contender. Maybe he goes to Houston. Maybe he goes to OKC, Orlando. Not really sure. But, wishing him well. I enjoyed him a lot this past season. The three-pointers, setting a franchise record for the Detroit Pistons, making over 300 three-pointers was incredible. I didn't mind the shimmies and the dancing. I thought it was entertaining. But wishing him well. I hope he does get to play basketball game again and he does get cleared, because he just seems like a really cool dude, really good human being. But we all make mistakes. I mean, I have friends that are in debt, and I think in life, it gets tough out there. It's especially just trying to survive the day, you guys. Like myself, I have a couple of jobs just to make ends meet. So don't really know, what's going on in his personal life or anything like that. I'm not going to pretend like I do know, but I'm just wishing him well and I hope to see that he does get to play basketball again. Now, we're going to end the podcast with an update on Cam Thomas. We talked about it, I believe, this week. Yeah, we did talk about it this week, now that I'm remembering, that the Pistons were the odds-on favorite to land Cam Thomas. Now, this is what Jake Fisher is hearing about the Cam Thomas situation as it relates to the Pistons being odds-on favorites and the Brooklyn Nets. So here's a little 1-minute video from Jake Fisher.
I saw some buzz. There was like a gambling line that came out listing that Detroit was the most likely team for Cam Thomas, but I checked on that. I think the Nets remain the most likely team for Cam Thomas, where at this point, I think of all these restricted free agents right now, Cam Thomas to me seems to be the most likely of all the restricted free agents to take the qualifying offer, because throughout all of my conversations around his restricted free agency, I have not heard that Brooklyn has offered Cam Thomas anything further than a 2-year deal with a team option on the second deal that I don't believe is going much north, if north at all, of the $14.1 million mid-level exception. where you see right there on our graphic that Cam Thomas was reportedly seeking $100 million over 4 years. I definitely believe he wants north of 20. Again, that's what all these guys want.
So there's a lot to kind of unpack here with Jake Fisher. He quickly kind of addressed the odds-on favorite with the Pistons. Said he called to see if that was even a thing from Detroit sent. Obviously, it wasn't. And it's basically what we were telling you guys this week. Like, gambling odds don't necessarily mean that the team is interested. It's just people in Las Vegas placing bets. That's all it is. Cam Thomas for $20 million a year, I think is kind of crazy. He does have an elite skill and, just scoring. But outside of that, when he's not scoring, like, what is he actually doing? I'd much rather have Jaden Ivey. It's just me. I don't know about you guys. Obviously, Jaden Ivey is also in the kind of the same boat where he is extension eligible. And the Pistons feel pretty confident they can get a deal done. But $100 million or over $100 million for a Cam Thomas, I would probably be out. Brooklyn, I think, offered him the mid-level exception. They offered him 14.1 in a 2-year deal. Like, they don't want to pay him that. I don't think a lot of teams want to pay him that. So he might just take his qualifying offer and say, I'll tough it out and go sign with a team that wants to pay me. I think that's the right approach. I don't think too many teams, especially this free agency period, we're going to, pay top dollar for a lot of these RFAs. I mean, you look at all these RFAs. You look at Kuminga, you look at Giddey, you look at Cam Thomas, and I'm sure there are others out there. But those are the big three that a lot of people talk about. And they're not getting paid because a lot of these NBA teams just don't want to pay them the money that they're asking. They're asking for like 30 million, 20 million. I think that's a little bit of an overpay when you look at all the guys that we just mentioned, but didn't want to kind of, touch on the Cam Thomas situation because I know I saw a lot of you guys discuss it. It was a really big topic across just the Detroit Pistons community, from people on Twitter to even, YouTube videos that I saw. A lot of people thinking that the Pistons actually were going to go out and target and acquire Cam Thomas. Doesn't sound like that's even a possibility. It was just a Las Vegas betting line odds, and it's off-season content, I guess, right? But did want to touch on it, wrap up the podcast. Do want to tell you guys, though, we won't be having an episode on Sunday, but I do have an episode coming out on Monday. It'll be a live stream. We'll be joined by the guys from the Pin Down podcast from the Detroit Bad Boys, Blake Silverman, Wes Davenport. Be live with them on Monday at 3:30 p.m. I know it's a little bit earlier than we actually do record. I just wanted to give you guys a heads up that no podcast tomorrow, but we will have a podcast on Monday with Blake and Wes. But hope you guys are enjoying your weekend, and we will talk to you and see you guys on Monday. As always, hope you guys are staying safe. Take care. And as always, go Pistons. Peace.